Villains oftentimes make or break a story. If they're lame, you're going to lose the audience. But if they're intriguing, they remember your story for a lifetime. This is what has made characters like Darth Vader, Thanos, and Lord Voldemort so memorable. We frequently see interesting villains in video games, but the ones that stick out the most are the ones that give us a personal connection. Whether it be from fighting them hundreds of times to having PTSD from their annoying catchphrases, they imprinted themselves in our memories. Many games specifically design their villains to be memorable through various means. Of course, that doesn't mean that every villain was intentional. There have been many a grunt that have turned into the bane of a fandom's existence just by their annoyance. There's one game, however, that did an amazing job of turning normal enemies into bitter rivals for the player. Shadow of Mordor. Shadow of Mordor introduces a revolutionary system called the Nemesis System that gives any orc that kills you, whether grunt or captain, a chance to advance themselves in the enemy army. This caused orcs that were already strong enough to kill you to continue to grow until you had a nemesis that hunted you ruthlessly. Many times the orcs would die and come back again for another round because beating you was their ultimate goal. But the Nemesis system was truly made for naturally creating a nemesis for the player. Through hunts, surprise attacks, and random encounters, the orcs remember you and what you did to them. They would taunt you and gloat about how they slew you in your last fight, yell at you for disrupting their parties or slaying them previously. Whatever they spoke about, you could feel their malice and knew that they weren't going to hold back this time. Especially early on in the game, it feels like a nightmare entering into any area that you know your archrival is in. My archrival's name is ingrained in my mind, even after all this time. Hura Raid Leader. We fought many times. Most of them, he gunned me down with his bow before I could best him. I came to hate him, as we would always crash into my missions and ruin every well-thought-out sneak attack. I remember the joy I felt after I killed him the first time. I had finally done it, I thought. But that dream was shattered before I could even think, as a short time later I was interrupted by an orc captain with bandages on his head. "Look what you did to me! I will make you pay!" he yelled. And I realized that my nemesis had returned. It was a constant struggle for most of the game as I fought my crossbow enemy, losing to him more times than I could hope to count. Finally, on the third time I killed him, he didn't reappear. I was relieved, but much like Batman without Joker, I felt a hollow victory. The presence that seemingly lurked around every corner since the start of the game was gone. The enemy which I had created, who had become a captain solely because of my influence, was dead. As much as I hated him, I was saddened by the fact that he was gone because he had been a key character in my story. But the Nemesis system didn't give me time to mourn his loss. Shortly after, I was thrust into battle after battle with many smaller captains. While none of them were as difficult as Hura, they all gave me a run for my money, and I soon forgot about Hura and his Raid of Terror. Of course, the Nemesis system wasn't done with Hura, and I was so shocked by the final surprise it had for me. I embarked on a story quest where I had to slay one of Sauron's strongest allies. As I got off the boat on the island, I noticed an orc army approached my own army of enslaved orcs. One steps forward. "You thought you were done with me, didn't you?" An all too familiar voice cackled from across the battlefield. Hura had returned, and this time he was all out. The Nemesis system had been keeping track of the player's most bitter rival, and of all the orcs I had fought, Hura had slain me more times than any of them, thereby making him my nemesis. I had never been so happy. It was one of the most epic fights I've ever had in a video game, but it wasn't specifically designed to be awesome through conventional means. If it had been any other orc, the fight would have been run-of-the-mill, but this battle was made so much better because it was my enemy. No one who plays Shadow of War will ever have the same enemy as I did, and that made it infinitely more exciting and personal. That's the beauty of the Nemesis system. It fostered true, meaningful rivalries, and then built the gameplay around that, giving you enemies who haunted you more than a normal villain could ever provide. It was survival of the fittest played out in almost poetic form. You and your rival inevitably were both cat and mouse, adapting to one another, one day laying a trap, and the next walking into one. And while at the end of the day, you were almost guaranteed to win at some point, your nemesis would never let you live down the number of times you died to them. This game created something so revolutionary that even if you felt that the majority of the game is mediocre, you have to give them credit for creating enemies that practically write their own stories. But I guess the question comes down to, why does it work? I mean, it would make more sense for them to create a witty, creative villain for their story, rather than randomly generating a villain, wouldn't it? Well, maybe not. See, the thing with the orc captains created by the Nemesis system is that they inevitably become the yin to the player's yang. They complement the player's strengths with their combat abilities, either being stronger, faster, or wittier than the player, and their weaknesses aren't easily exploitable by the player. They also grow with the players, which is rather unusual for a villain. Take the notable villains from earlier. These villains are memorable because of their raw power. They established themselves long before our heroes came along. But with the orcs, it's the opposite. I remember many times when a normal grunt would kill me and take one of the empty captain slots on the board.
Even Hura was that way. He took advantage of my weaknesses and then he took his rightful place on the board. That's what I call a shadow effect.
As the players grow in power, so do the enemies. Every time you rest or die, they have the chance to attack other orcs or throw parties, which help them level up. You really feel as though the world is alive around you, and the longer you take to do your job, the stronger they grow in your absence. This is extremely rare in video games, because most of the time they're either forcefully scaled to your level, which creates an unnatural feeling to the enemies, or they don't scale at all, which creates a hilariously easy enemy. I think what the Nemesis system does, which makes it an amazing creation, is that it makes every encounter so much more intense. You know that your fall is just a stepping stone for a new monster to be made. If you're reckless, you'll end up making everyone else stronger. You have to be smart, precise, and calculated if you want to ensure that you don't die before you're able to take out your opponents. All of these things combine into creating a nemesis that's perfect for the player, that terrifies the player and that causes the player to strategize, not because their enemies are ridiculously hard like minigames, but because their enemies are designed to utilize the player's weaknesses against them. I think the reason that the Nemesis system creates the greatest villains of all time is because you have to truly look at your enemy. You have to think about their weaknesses. You have to think about your weaknesses. You don't oftentimes have to consider your own weaknesses in a video game. You have to think about when's the best time to ambush them. You have to plan so much around this one enemy. And then you get into the heat of the battle and every plan goes awry. And you realize you just have to fight. It's not about winning at that point. It's about surviving and not letting your enemy get stronger. And I think that's just a beautiful thing because it creates this bond between you and the enemy because they hate to see you as much as you hate to see them. Many of them will be aggravated that you're invading one of their personal events. Of course, not to say that they're not going to try and kill you. They're going to do that too. But just to see this clashing of their personality and yours, and their strengths and your strength, and their weaknesses and your weaknesses, to find that where they're perfectly built to go against you, not because a developer made them to be, but because you almost hand-picked them, that's something you never see in games. And I applaud them for it. It's revolutionary. It's changed the way that video games should be made.
They did something that for years I don't think anyone ever imagined. I think we always just assumed that we'd have to create a villain for the players to enjoy, but this game showed that that's not the case. We can have villains that are created almost by the player. And I hope to see more games pick up this idea, to try it, to see some innovation on it, because I think if we work with it, it could make some of the best stories we've had in years. Not because somebody designed it, but because the players had a hand in it. And that is amazing. Well guys, I think that's going to do it for today. I'd love to know your opinions down in the comments. If you feel that this would work for other games, I'd love to know. If you have any ideas, hey, I'm interested to hear them. Or if you think it's just a one-hit wonder and it won't work inside any other context, I'm interested to hear too. I hope y'all will stick around. I have a new gaming video coming out Tuesday. So if y'all want to check that out, I'll be glad to have y'all back. Until then, Scarver out.